Good afternoon, everyone. And today we shall be briefly discussing about Robert Owen, his contribution towards education, towards the movement for cooperative society, and we will also see as to how Robert Owen actually is contributing in some ways to the development of socialist thought and ideas. Uh, um, Before we begin, let me start by introducing who Robert Owen himself was. So, in the early period of the 19th century Europe, you see, there was the emergence of what was then known as utopian socialism. And in that particular context, particularly in Britain, Robert Owen took its center stage, like Charles Fourier and for that matter, Saint Simon, and then the French, and then you see the philosopher like Feuerbach in Germany. They took the center stage there. In this part of the world, it was Robert Owen who took the center stage. Uh, Actually, it is often said, that it was around the figure of Robert Owen, uh, uh, or this Robert Owen, that the idea of utopian socialism also developed, and that so many other movements, especially around the 19th century, took place. Around the idea that Robert Owen was trying to push forward, that this utopian idea of socialism also evolved in terms of movements. Let us see who Robert Owen was. So he was born in a place known as Newtown, Montgomeryshire, in North Wales on the 14th of May 1771, and his father was a postmaster. Although out of his calling, he lived as a saddler, and he lived as a saddler and an ironmonger. And at the age of 4 or 5, he was sent to school and took great interest in learning, and his passion for readings was being noticed by everybody. Uh, uh, Many people, like the clergymen, the physician, the lawyers, and so on and so forth, were keen, to actually permit him to borrow their books, and also to let him learn more, because he showed great interest in learning, great interest in reading. And at the age of 8, 9, he had very intimate visitors in his own family itself, and they tried to influence him with religious books that they provided for his collections. However, you see, Robert Owen, at a very young age itself, he was surprised to learn how various sects of Christianity were opposed to each other. He was perplexed by the fact that there were so many sect of Christian believers. There were so many denominations among the Christians. So therefore, afterwards, he was also appalled at the hatred between Christians and the Jews. For the very fact that Robert Owen understood that Christianity was born out of Judaism, yet they hated each other so much. He was really much saddened by these kinds of confrontation, particularly between Mohammedans, Hindus, Chinese, etc., and so on and so forth, and even between them and the so-called pagans and the infidels, which means those who do not believe in the institutionalized religions, and those who don't believe in God even. So therefore, Robert Owen was a bit, right from his early age, he was not anymore convinced by the authority of various Christian denominations and various kinds of faiths, whether they were Mohammedans, Christians, Hindus, then the Chinese for that matter, or the various forms of religion that the Chinese practice, like the Taoism, like the many others, So, therefore, for Robert Owen, the knowledge of these contending faith and their teaching of each other's hatred had created a doubt, in his mind, especially with regard to the truth of any of their teaching. He was not really convinced that whatever they teach was the ultimate truth, because they often fought among themselves. They often contested against each other's ideas, and therefore, at the age of 10, Owen's interest in religious and other texts compelled him to feel strongly that there must be something fundamentally wrong in all religious piety, or in all religions for that matter, and therefore they are taught up, to that particular period, all the religious teachings that were taught up to that period. So, therefore, gradually he started withdrawing himself from the world of religious piety. And at the same age, at this very early age, that is at the age of 10, 11, and 12, he took to apprenticeship at a time when textile sector was undergoing huge expansions. So therefore, during the next 15 years, he climbed the spinning industry's social and professional ladder. We will see little later what were the contributions of Robert Owen, especially in New Lanark. So these experiences of industrial life that he gained in the textile industry, in the spinning industry, textile industry, especially life of self-development, he undoubtedly prominently influenced his interest and compassion, and he displayed this on removing by contributing whatever he could to remove the plight of the laboring classes. So in 1791 he was made the under manager of the biggest spinning mills in Manchester, and he witnessed the social consequences of the Industrial Revolution on the working class. So basically what I'm trying to say is that Robert Owen, having come from a certain kind of background where he would have been convinced that religion would have been predominantly determining the social, cultural, political and economic life of the people, yet he realized that all religion and the kind of truth that they were teaching may not necessarily be the actual truth, because they were contesting against each other at the same time, and there was hatred among them. So therefore, from his passion of his reading, his experiences in the bustling industrial life and the heat of the Industrial Revolution, Robert Owen was convinced that man's character, the pattern of their behavior, and even the scale of values in the society is greatly dependent on the environmental condition. I repeat again that Robert Owen, being an avid reader and also a hard-working manager in the bustling industrial life, particularly with his experiences in the spinning mills industry or the textile industry, he was convinced that man's character, our character, and the pattern of our behavior, and even the values that we consider as most important values and secondary values and tertiary values, therefore these values in society, they are greatly dependent by the environment in which we live. Which means that if we lived in an environment where there is constant competition, it cutthroat competition as we say today, then people may not necessarily think about virtues, they may not necessarily think about values, but they will only have to think about how they would be able to get, their labor sold out so that they would be able to feed themselves. So, therefore, you see, since a character, therefore, was molded by circumstances, as we say, suppose now, as I said, if the circumstances is very dire, very critical, then if our character will also be, molded, will be character will be determined by these circumstances. Suppose now I am always hungry, then stealing food from somebody's kitchen may not necessarily be a bad virtue for me, because I have to survive. So therefore he says, since character was molded by circumstances, then improved circumstances would lead to goodness. So if character of human being is determined by these circumstances, therefore the improvement of the circumstances, the environment in which we live, will only lead to goodness. So if we want good human being, then the environment should be good. Their circumstances should be good. So therefore he argued that the root of all evil lay in the false attribution to men of their capacity to form their own character. So I repeat again that the root of evil, he believed, lay in the false attribution to men of their capacity to form their own character. So therefore, the very fact that we might think that we can form our own character despite the environment around us, despite the circumstances in which we are surviving, then that is wrong. Then the evil is because of this kind of belief, this kind of practice. So therefore, to him, this kind of belief allowed the rich to put blame on the poor for their poverty and condemning them for their inefficiency. So therefore, because of this kind of belief, what happens is, especially in a capitalist society, then the rich starts blaming the poor people, and and therefore they condemn their poverty for and calling it their own inefficiency, which means you can say that the poor are poor because they are lazy. The poor are poor because they are not capable to tap their own human resources. This is therefore what Robert Owen is against. Therefore, instead of realizing that these are the consequences of a bad environment and of a social system built on false promises, then what happens is society start believing that the circumstances does not influence the character. So later, you see, in historical materialism, Karl Marx will try to argue that the economic base will determine the character of human being. The economic base will determine the nature of the society and the way people will behave, the economic environment. But Robert Owen here is saying the overall circumstances and the environment in which he lived will determine the determine the character of human being and the pattern of his behavior, as well as the kind of values that he may aspire. So it is in this background, therefore, that Robert Owen took upon himself the challenge to bring about reform, especially in factory life, in order to alleviate the workers' plight. With this ambition, he began his journey in 1800 when he took up his father-in-law's spinning factory in New Lanark, Scotland, which would be converted into his industrial village. And soon he would also this would also become his doctrine's major testing ground for a new society that will spill new ideas and environment having far more superior living standard and working condition to the average that was available at that time. So basically, what happened is that Robert Owen, having seen the environment, having seen the circumstances under which people were living, especially during the Industrial Revolution, he was convinced that there is something wrong, and therefore, in order to set these things right, he has to start by experimenting by himself, especially as he started, managing his own spinning factory, which rather his father-in-law's factory at New Lanark in Scotland. So, here what he tries to do is he tries to set new standard, new rules and regulation, and with this he also managed to elevate the working condition, the environment under which the laborers actually had to live. So, so therefore, now we come to New Lanark. Sorry, I didn't go into the detail of how this New Lanark was gained by Robert Owen, but we will gradually talk about it as we go along. So in the New Lanark, Robert Owen tried to develop an environment suitable for character formation based on his ideas of cooperation and self-help, which means based on the idea that workers should cooperate among themselves and they should help among themselves. So for such noble contribution to the society, he has been also regarded as the father of socialism in Britain, as I said earlier, and he also successfully put his ideas into practice with his followers, and especially the Rochdale Equitable pioneers, who are regarded by many as the founders of the modern cooperative movement and the concept of what we have today as the self-help group that first emerged in England and later in America, of course. And of course, this was spread throughout the world. And today in India, we always talk about self-help group wherever we go. So, so therefore, now Robert Owen, he believed in giving control to the worker in the factory establishment of production. He believed that in the process of production, it is the workers who should be in control. So therefore, he concentrated on his philosophy of laying importance to the means to an end. He was interested in concentrating his ideas on the whole concept of means to an end, which means that if we have to achieve something, the means should be proper. Our journey towards the end should be good, enjoyable, and satisfactory. Then only our end will be satisfactory, rather than like Immanuel Kant and all talk about means to an end and an end in itself, which means other people, even Mahatma Gandhi for that matter, he was more concerned about means to an end rather than an end in itself. So, and he believed that if the working man ever was to achieve equality, then the man must change first the attitude. If he has to achieve something in life, if he has to achieve equality, if man has a dream to achieve a better society, then first of all he has to change his attitude. And it is here that Owen argued that the working man had to know of, believe in, and be equipped to fight for the cause of his own development. So therefore, man has to change his attitude, and the working man has to know of, believe in, and also be equipped to fight for the cause of his own development. He has to know that if he wants development, he is the source of that development. He has to believe that he can do it, and he has to equip himself to be able to fight, to be able to achieve that development. So Robert Owen was also convinced that the advancement of mankind could be furthered by the improvement of every individual's environment. That the Yeah, that the so therefore, if there is to be an improvement of advancement of humankind, then improvement of every individual's personal environment is necessary. So in the year 1797, while on his business trip to Glasgow, Robert Owen met, of course, his future wife, Carolyn Dale, the daughter of David Dale, who was also the owner of the great spinning mill in New Lanark. And his friendship with Dale led to marriage proposal, and this rather turned into a train of other events that ended up in Owen and his Manchester partner, buying the New Lanark in 1800. And in the same year, he moved to Scotland and took over the management of the New Lanark. And with his skillful management, he took the enterprise to significant success, and he grew into the larger cotton spinning industry in Europe. And because he was able to own these things by himself, he also introduced a number of reforms into the factory, the community, and education. And therefore, in order that he could influence this, he could really influence with his commitment to his ideas. He also took to writings about society and the need for new communities, and gradually this also made him into a celebrated figure, in the industrial society of Britain. And Robert Owen, therefore, he initiated a lot of reform in the factory system. You see, Robert Owen had a strong desire for transformation of the life of the working population of his factory. So immediately after he took over, he improved the provision of housing by adding windows and fresh air ventilation. He also monitored for the preparation of healthy food. Before this, you can imagine Great Britain having to go through the Industrial Revolution, where there is so much of brute forces that only believe in, as I said yesterday, in interest. So this was a time when this whole idea of saying that everything is temporary except interest, or nothing is permanent except interest. This is the kind of time everybody was on the cutthroat. Even the workers, they have to work so hard, from morning till night. And industries, they would employ even very young infant to engage in the industry to enhance their production. That was the only way they could control the market. So therefore, Robert Owen wanted to change all these. And you see, in that process, people had to live in dungeons, so to say. They had no proper living condition, no proper working condition. Only production was the mainstay of the industrial development in the whole continent. So therefore, you see, he also provided, therefore, with his initiative, he started engaging himself in ensuring there is a better living condition, better food being provided. He also provided education to all ages on sites at the mill, and also ensured good working environment for all, especially the young people. And these noble initiatives therefore led to the resulting boost in productivity, which enabled his factory to become one of the most profitable mills in Europe. So leaders came from all over the world to see New Lanark and to marvel at Owen's success. And therefore, owing to his own success, Robert Owen was even invited to provide testimony of the New Lanark, to a committee of House of Commons in 1816. And in 1817, therefore, he published a very important book known as A New View on Society, which became the bestseller of the day. And recognizing its importance, even John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, he voluntarily corrected book prior to its publication. And now we come to New Lanark. In order to make New Lanark a model community, Owen needed other people's, of course, financial support, and he took a number of partners to finance his social programs. However, he was firm on two important aspects of investment. that is socially responsible investment and limited return, and so he set that at 5% for the investors. So what Robert Owen tried to do is that all those people who want to invest, they would get only 5% of the profit, because the other aspect of the profit will be shared among the workers themselves. You see, so therefore investment had to be socially responsible, which means other part of the investment will be for the improvement of their living condition, will be for the improvement of education, building cooperative society, and so on and so forth. So with this, Robert Owen succeeded, in bringing about economic and social success through the support of philanthropists and their means to make the poor self-reliant. So with this vision, he started transforming New Lanark community into a new society through various radical initiatives that brought him, fame and captured the ears of even the leaders of Great Britain, France, and America. And during 1820, Owen made two separate addresses of his views of the new social system in, Rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, where the President Adams and Monroe and their cabinet and the Supreme Court and both houses of the Congress also attended, which means he became a very, very famous man. And therefore, inspired by this kind of success, Robert Owen began to write on the subject of sustainable communities, and he also publicized his ideas further by giving regular lectures everywhere. And to work on his theories on sustainable communities, Robert Owen sold the mills of the New Lanark in 1825 and bought a settlement in Indiana, USA, and with his partner William McClure and his son Robert Williams, David and Richard, and Owen wanted to create a utopian community even there. Of course, this settlement was renamed New Harmony, but was unfortunately unsuccessful, mainly because it attracted lots of people with great ideas, but very few with practical skill and education, especially in the sector of farming, construction of farming, and because this was needed for his kind of model. So therefore, this is what is a contribution of Robert Owen. Robert Owen, of course, he returned back in 1828 to Britain after his wife died, and took opportunity to travel around the country. And as I said, he started now a lot of other movements, especially to movements that will lead to the development of cooperative society. And therefore, Robert Owen is considered as one of the fathers of the cooperative society. Of course, there are various argument towards this, but Robert Owen is naturally one of those who pioneered the concept of cooperative society. Now, we come to another very important aspect, and that is the child labor, and how Robert Owen actually transformed this idea of child labor and liberated child from forced labor. So at the start of the 19th century, you see, there was a lot of children working in mills all over Britain. This situation was so difficult, to convince even the workers to enter the dark and dangerous mills, and propel the owners to utilize the service of orphan children to make up for their workforce. They made use of the orphan children for the purpose of their production, as the owners were not able to convince even their regular workers to engage in some of the dirty and dangerous jobs. So even in the parishes, which means the unit of the church, like we have in Silchar, the parishes, maybe like community. You see, even the parishes, they had a practice that when they have to take up orphans, what happened is they place an orphan at the mill. If somebody, some family, they lost their parents, they will take up the children, but they place these children in the mills, and the owner of the mills became their legal guardian, and as such, you see, later they took full control over the life of the orphan children, and they were only given food, clothing, and access to basic education rather than their wages. They were never paid wages. So in such a scenario, you see, the children came under complete control of the owner at every aspect of their life, and whether it is food, whether it is accommodation, even their movement was under constant supervision by the owner. So many of the owners took advantage of that particular existing system, and some children were forced to work 15 hours a day and also lived in very squalid condition. So therefore, in 1800, when Robert Owen was appointed as mill manager of the New Lanark, which was founded by his father-in-law David Dale, he was appalled at the condition of the workers, and he described the situation in his autobiography, and I quote, "The people were surrounded by bad condition, and these bad conditions had powerfully acted upon them to misform their characters and their conduct." No, the people was surrounded by bad conditions, and these bad conditions had powerfully acted upon them to misform their characters and conduct. So after he, along with his partner, bought a new Lanark, he worked hard to improve the conditions of the, especially working children. First of all, he refused to let children under the age of 10 to work in the mill, which was quite opposite to the practice of David Dale, who received orphaned or parish apprentices at the age of 5. And therefore, there are also records that showed that in 1793 there were 275 apprentices, and this increased to almost 300 and 400 in 1800. And therefore, owing to very deplorable condition under which the children had to work, Owen put his utmost effort to ameliorate it, to improve that, and he refused to let children under the age of 10 to work in the mill. Even older children were not permitted to work more than 14 hours a day, and he provided them time off for meal despite protest from his business partners. And after Robert Owen was able to gain more control over the factory by shifting his business deal with other partners in 1816, he also further reduced the working hours of children to 12, and he also made sure that New Lanark children were provided with hygienic and spacious accommodation, clothing, and even quality food. Along with this, what Robert Owen was able to do was, as he himself saw, that during the 19th century, the working class population, they believed that providing education for the children was not important. So therefore, for them, working and getting money was more important, because these would help the children to avoid bad habits. So therefore, at this point in time, Robert Owen, what he did was, he was against the idea that children would be educated only after they have finished working for 14 and 15 hours. So therefore, he was against this kind of education, because he said that this is useless and meant only to further torture the children, torment the children. So this kind of instruction, when the strength of the children was exhausted, he says, only tormented them further without any real good, for he found none of them understood anything. They attempted to read, or many of them even fell asleep. So therefore, in his biography, Robert Owen insisted that this kind of education was only tormenting the children more, and therefore he took it upon himself for transforming environment of learning into pleasurable exercise. So therefore, in the New Lanark, Robert Owen, as I said earlier, he believed that human character was the what was of utmost importance, and therefore human character and their values would be formed by education, and therefore it took keen interest in improving the condition, the education of the children. Owen, you see, he insisted that children should have access to good education, whatever their social status be. And in keeping with this vision, he opened the Institute for the Formation of Character at New Lanark on January 1816, where children were taught at different levels between 3 to 5, between 6 to 10, between 10 to 15 in groups, and 15 to 20 in the evening class, which means according to their age, Robert Owen would gather them and give them education. You know, they were of course taught in subjects similar to contemporary days like history, geography, reading, arithmetic, and so on and so forth. And apart from these, he also insisted that music, dancing, painting also form a very important aspect of their life, and therefore they should be taught. Meals and refreshment were also provided to the children, and occasional excursion were also taken so as to give the students certain kind of exposure. He was also encouraged. He also encouraged adults to use the institute. You see, in the evening class for special lectures, for concerts, for entertainment, so as to give them some kind of leisure. So, in order to encourage pleasure in learning, Owen also ensured that there was no punishment or no reward. There was no charge for educational services for both adult and children, and so therefore, only the older working children were asked to make minimal contributions to meet the causes of education. Okay, so therefore, this is what Robert Owen actually tried to do uh, uh, in his New Lanark, to bring about changes in the society. Robert Owen, as I said, he also contributed immensely to the development of the cooperative society. I'm not going to go into the detail of that because we are already 40 minutes. But what I'm trying to say is that Robert Owen started talking about the Factory Act. He started talking about the rights of the workers. He started mobilizing people. He started writing and so on and so forth. That ultimately led to the development of the idea that people should work together, come together, and profit together, and share the profit. Okay, just like he experimented in New Lanark, he also wanted to experiment in other aspects of society, and this therefore led to the development of the concept of cooperative society. And with this, therefore, as I said earlier, Robert Owen has been attributed as somebody who is significant in the development of cooperative society. Okay. So therefore, with this, I would rather end my lecture for today, although there are so many other things that I wanted to share. But I think we would also, anyway, thank you very much.